Hello, Professor. This is the final video presentation from the group number 24. Our topic is about the perspective of young generation toward the gender diversity representation in film, and we want to compare that representation from both Western and Thai film. So our research question is, what does the young generation think about gender diversity presented in both Western and Thai film? For the literature review, we have reviewed around 8 research articles that are related to our research topic. It is that film influence the idea and belief of people in the society towards certain topic, and that influence has more impact on young audiences because they are still developing and shaping their worldviews. And as the lack of gender equality in the film industry, most Hollywood films in the past, also having a diverse representation of genders is crucial in today's world, as it can help normalize diversity. Even though the Western film industry has ignored and misled the idea of gender diversity before, there is a statistic that can prove that Western films started to improve their portrayal continuously, both for the crew member behind the camera and for the cast member in front of the camera. Even there is still some missing aspect as well. And lastly, was the media and film present about gender role and diversity of gender in a specific time will reflect the idea, norms, and perspective of the society toward this particular issue at the time period, because movie can be a great mechanism for conversation and reflection.
Okay, for methodology. Our research aimed to examine how well the LGBTQ community has been represented in Western films compared to the LGBTQ portrayal of Western films to Thai media. We also aim to explore the perspective of the young generation towards the gender diversity representation through films. The methodology approach we used is to collect first, quantitative data from the content analysis, and second, qualitative data from the interviews of our target groups. For content analysis, after we brainstorm and discuss the topic of the research, we decide to separate the content analysis into 3 parts, in which the division based on each types and characteristic of films. The medium we use for the analysis is the poster of each movie, as it is the best portrayal of the whole film in general, except for the film itself. We separate it in 3 types. First, Western superhero films, and second, Western films with LGBTQ main role, and the last, Thai films with LGBTQ main role. And for we finding the famous film poster that can show the characteristic of the film clearly, 6 per group, and then finding the similarity and creating the categories to conduct the coding. Then we start to find the similarity among all these films and create the categories to conduct the coding. We had created around 12 to 15 categories that all of them have in common. Then we decide to pick only the final 7 categories, which are these following. First, year film was released. Second, type of the film. Third, gender of the main characters. Fourth, number of main LGBTQ characters. Fifth, which LGBTQ genders are represented. And then age of LGBTQ characters. And lastly, how LGBTQ characters are represented. So, all the categories are used to analyze the presentations of gender diversity in each aspect. whether from the view of popular films or the LGBTQ plus film themselves. After we had decided on the final categories, we create the codebook and the key answers for testing in order to measure the effectiveness of the content analysis. We let our friends and siblings test the codebook as they are in the demographic of our target. Okay, and lastly, we collecting and analyzing our data. In terms of the target group, we want to know the opinions. In terms of the target group, we want to know the opinions and attitudes of the young generation who are in Generation Z, as they tend to watch films from different nationalities and are open-minded for a new attitude towards gender diversity. After the stability of our content analysis has been confirmed, we reform the coding in a form of chart and graph and making it easier for analyzing and comparing the results. Then we start to interpret from the big numbers of the results and prepare the data for conducting further interviews and research process. Lastly, we decide to choose the method of content analysis because its result is quite more interesting than our survey we had done. It provides information to analyze the representation of LGBTQ+ in Western films and provides obvious information for comparison to Thai media. Content analysis makes it easy and effective in terms of statistics and numbers after we turn to analysis into the charts from the Google Sheet. For the part of interview and methodology, we creating interview questions based on what we want to know more after what we already have from content analysis data. We were gathering information from interviewing people who were aged around 18 to 30 and love to watch a film. Our groups aims to find opinion and information about gender diversity representation in film. And for the results that we got from interview, first, compared to the past, both Western and Thai were developing and increasing to be more diverse in gender roles, but in Thai it is not diverse as much as Westerns. And then, the types that has the most representation of LGBTQ plus community are go to teen comedy and drama films, include Thai horror comedy drama. And the next, the gender which is most seen in the films are male and female. And then we got that Thai is more lacking and stereotypes than Western according to plot and character in films are most unrealistic than Western films. And lastly, gender diversity representation through film was.
For the content analysis, we divide the films into three categories. The first one is popular superhero films. The films include Avengers, X-Men, Justice League, Fantastic Four, Black Panther, and Spider-Man. Even how up-to-date these superhero films are, they highly show the lack of gender diversity, whether in terms of gender equality between male and female or the LGBTQ community representation in the films. We can see that 100% of the main characters are male. There are also a few female roles, with less importance compared to the male role, while none of the main characters are LGBTQ people. Even the supporting characters themselves are also non-representative. Therefore, we could see the result that one of the famous film songs that are in a crisis in the lack of gender diversity representation is the action sci-fi song. As superhero films are in this type, plus gender diversity still lacks in some ways, as it could not be present normally in every type of films. From Thai's film categories, the first one is Still Together and Hormones, Two Moon, Ho Teo Tek, Lucy and the Fake, and So Does the Series. As we can see from the pie chart, we can see that Thai films always portray the LGBTQ character in a stereotypical way that does not describe what LGBTQ community really is in the reality. And also, Thai LGBTQ films are always portraying gay character more than other LGBTQ character. As we can see from the pie chart, you can see that gay characters are up to 75% and lesbian only 25%, and there are none of other LGBTQ character love. And you can see that 100% of Thai LGBTQ films are romantic comedy, high school, or comedy genre because it is most related to the audience that watch Thai LGBTQ films. And also, Thai LGBTQ films always have more than 3 LGBTQ characters in the films because they are gaining the interest from the audience and are portraying them to be the main character in the films. If we talk about the LGBTQ character age in Thai films, we can see that it is very diverse because it is including teenager for 66%, adult for 16.7%, and middle age for 16.7%. Even all of the Thai LGBTQ films are in romantic comedy, high school, and comedy genre, but it is also including other age more than mostly teenager in their films. But also some LGBTQ films still have men as a main character in the films for 16.7%. Even the films are about the LGBTQ community love. For the Western films, the film we chose to do our content analysis is Love Simon, Handsome Devil, Riverdale, Call Me By Your Name, The Politician, and Sex Education. We can see from the pie chart that Western LGBTQ films are both romantic comedy and drama, comparing to Thai films that only had a romantic comedy shown in the LGBTQ films. And we can see that Western films are more diverse in the character of the LGBTQ community representation that are including queer for 13.3%, bisexual for 20%, lesbian for 26.7%, and gay for 40%. But we can see that Western LGBTQ films are different from Thai films in the representation of the LGBTQ character ages. We can see that the Western films are including mostly teenager age for 85.7% and for adult only 14.3%. And also, Western films are like Thai films that even in the LGBTQ movies, there are still 16.7% of the movies that the main character are still men. But it is differently from Thai films that the Western films are always portraying the character in the realistic way, showing the real perspective of LGBTQ community to the audience. As we compare Thai LGBTQ films and Western LGBTQ films, we can see that there are two things different from each other. The first thing is the representation of the LGBTQ character in the films, because Thai are only focusing on the gay and lesbian, and gay characters are getting up to 75%, and lesbian only 25%. But in Western films, it is very diverse in the character because it is including the queer, bisexual, lesbian, and gay. And the other thing is how they portray the character throughout the films. Thai films want to gain interest and to entertain the audience only without focusing how the perspective of the LGBTQ community are going out through the films. But for the Western films, the character really show about the reality of the LGBTQ community through the character without changing to gain interest or to entertain the audience. The main limitation we had faced during our research is the lack of time to collect and filter the data intensively, because we can miss some important factors to consider in order to reach maximum and effective result. The content we use for analysis, which are film posters, sometimes could not describe all the detail and story of each film, including the gender identity or the personality portrayal of the character. Even though we try to eliminate the misunderstanding of the interpretation by picking the clear poster that show the explicit element related to our concerns, the interpretation of the content may be different depending individually on the existing experience, knowledge about the films of whoever interpret them during conducting the validity test. In the process of the content analysis credibility test, the coder might be confused about whether to choose the answer of the category based on what they see in the poster or their existing knowledge about the sample films. Meanwhile, this limitation is also related to the broadness of the films industry that produce a ton of films in a specific period of time, which lead to the limitation of the sample size of the content we analyze. Although we have set the purpose of the category in the films we decide to use for the analysis to examine how the LGBTQ community has been present in films and which type of film present in the community, the content for analysis we pick might reflect only for the scope of popular films or the films that have the main character from the LGBTQ community, which could not be the representative of all films in the industry. Plus, we also were aware that the demographic of the sample films we chose in terms of release year quite focused only on the last 2 decades, as we want to keep the focus on the current representation. Still, the content released in a specific period may have an effect on the comparison of how different the LGBTQ community has been presented between the present and the past.
In conclusion, from our content analysis and interview, we could understand and compare each type and style of films related to gender diversity. Comparing Thai films and Western films, there is a big difference in the LGBTQ+ characters. Thais are focusing more on the gay characters, but for Western films, it is very diverse in the gender of the characters, also in the way of portraying the character through the films. Western films are more likely to show how the reality of the LGBTQ+ community through the character better than Thai films. Thai films are only want to gain interest and entertain the audience without focusing on the base reality of the LGBTQ+ community that should really be presented for the society to understand about them. However, some types of films, even in the Western, are still lacking of gender diversity as appear in popular superhero movies that focus on presenting the male roles.